Alright guys, in this lesson we are going to see how we can add a small crowd counter on top of the player, so on top of all the runners. Let's do it. So first things first, we first want to draw our bubble, let's say, that will contain the amount of runners. So for that you can open your photo editor, but I prefer using a vector graphics editor. It's easier and more customizable. So I'm gonna get the bubble shape right here and I'm gonna draw a bubble. All right, you can edit it to fit your needs. I like it to be somewhat like this. Okay, so let's convert this as a curve. Okay, cool. Then I can just grab these points and place them somewhat around the middle. Okay, perfect. And let's set it white. Using white sprites or images in Unity, is better because you will be able to change their color. Okay, cool. We've got our sprite. So now we can resize it or keep it as is. So I'm just gonna keep it as is and export it. All right. So when exporting it, you want to create a new folder in the assets folder and maybe call it sprites. All right, that way our project is well organized. So let's double click on it to open it and let's call this bubble. Perfect. Let's jump back to Unity. Nice. Now in our crowd runner folder, we should see a sprites folder. And here is our bubble. So for now, we can't drag and drop our bubble because it's counted as a texture. We need to change the texture type here to a sprite. All right, perfect. Now we can just apply the changes and it's now a sprite. We can drag it and drop it in the hierarchy. All right, here it is. Perfect. So now we want this bubble first to be smaller, but to follow the player wherever it goes. So for now, you can see that if I hit play, like if the player was moving and I hit play, the bubble is not following the player. So we have to do something for it to follow the player. The easiest thing to do is to grab the bubble and drop it as a child of the player. So now if I hit play, you can see that it's going with it, but I can't change the bubble's position because it's counted as a runner. If you remember well, in our crowd system script, let's open it quickly, we are setting the position of our children. So now the bubble is counted as a children of the crowd. So that's not good. To fix that, we are going to create here, and here, sorry, it was settings. It wasn't elements, but that's okay. It's just a header. It's just a label. So let's create a new header and call it elements. Okay, let's create a new serialized field, private, let's say transform, and we are going to create a new parent for the runners. So let's say runners parent. Okay, cool. Then here, instead of saying transform.childCount, we're going to say runners parent.childCount, and you want to change this value everywhere you see transform. So here it's going to be runners parent.getChild again. And I think that's it. So let's try this out. So now we need to create our runners parent. So let's right click on the player and create empty game object. This will be our runners parent. Perfect. Now we only need to grab all of the runners and drop them into the runners parent. Perfect. Now we need to specify our runners parent to the crowd system. Here it is. Let's do it. Perfect. Now the bubble is following the player but is not counted as a runner. Nice. To be able to see how many runners we have, we need to add a small component to our bubble, which is called Text Mesh Pro. So right click on it, select 3D object and select Text Mesh Pro. If it's the first time you're using that component, you'll be prompted a small window like this one, and you just need to import the Text Mesh Pro Essentials for it to work. All right, it should be quick. Perfect. Now we can see that we have a text right here. So first off, let's scale it down to the size of our bubble. So for the width, I'm going to say 2 for the width, and the height will be something like maybe 1. Okay, you can still press F to focus on the Text Mesh Pro. All right, let's drag it up. Perfect, maybe a little bit smaller. Okay, this is good. Let's bring it a little bit back on the Z-axis for it to render before the bubble. Okay, now let's change our text. Let's say maybe 10 for our text for now, because we are going to control this value by code. Then you want to tick the auto size checkbox right here. That way the text will resize automatically with the size of our bounding box. For the minimum size of the text, let's say 1 or 5. 4 seems to be good. Perfect. We still can't see our text because it's white on a white background. So maybe let's color it black. And here we go. Cool. I like to align the text at the center. Okay, cool. It already seems pretty good now. What we can do now is change the font. So do we have some fonts here? We don't. So to change the font, I recommend using the DaFont website. So let's go there. Okay, perfect. Here we are in DaFont. To get some free fonts, you can select any category here. So maybe let's select cartoon. Let's show more options and tick the 100 free checkbox. Then submit. So now you have a variety of free fonts you can use for personal and commercial use. Let's use one of these. Maybe the first one, Milky Coffee. Okay, let's download it. Once you've downloaded it, you just need to create a new folder in the CrowdRunner folder, like so. Folder, and let's call it fonts. Okay, perfect. Now we can drag our Milky Coffee font and drop it in the fonts folder. But now we can't use it directly. We can't just drag and drop it here in the font asset. We need to create a font asset for Text Mesh Pro to work properly. So right click on the Milky Coffee font, select Create, Text Mesh Pro, Font Asset. So there is a shortcut for that, but yeah, you can just use it or not. Okay, cool. And now we have our signed distance field for our font. Okay, let's grab it and see if I can drop it here. Perfect. Nice. We now have our font working properly. So maybe let's bring it a little bit below. Perfect. So now we want to create another script that will change the value of this text according to the amount of runners we have. So for that, select the bubble component, the bubble game object, sorry. So for that, in the script folder, let's create a new script. Okay, let's call it crowd counter. Nice. We can drag this script onto the player or onto the bubble directly. You're free to do it as you wish. So let's drop it onto the bubble for now and open it. Okay, perfect. So now we will need to add a library. This library is the Text Mesh Pro library. That way we can use and change the value of our text. Okay, cool. Let's create a new header. Call it elements, new serialized field again. And it's going to be a private field, Text Mesh Pro. Let's call it counter, or maybe crowd counter text. Okay, perfect. So now if we go back to Unity, we can see that we can specify our crowd counter text in the inspector. So let's drag it and drop it. Let's rename this first, crowd counter text. Okay, perfect. Now we need to grab the data from this parent to know how many runners we have. So for that, we need a reference to it. So let's create another serialize field, which is going to be private. It's a transform, and let's call it runner's parent. Cool. So now in the update method, so called 60 times per second or 30 depending on your FPS, we can say crowd counter text dot text to access the text variable of our text mesh pro will be equals to the runner's parent child count. But here we've got an error because this wants to have a string and this is an integer. So let's use a method called toString. And now we've just converted our integer to a string. Okay, let's go back to Unity. Let's drag and drop our runner's parent and hit play. Perfect. We now have the amount of runners in our crowd. So to try this out, let's remove one. Okay, perfect. Let's add 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's select all of these and duplicate them a bunch of time. Perfect, it's working as intended. Nice. Now that we've got our crowd running, we need to add some ground for it to run on. And that will be the topic of the next lesson. Stay tuned.